Welcome to the third dimension. The US airstrikes targeting an oil port held by the Houthi rebels killed 80 people and wounded 171 others, the group said Friday, in the deadliest known attack under President Donald Trump's new military campaign against the Iranian-backed faction. Local footage of the aftermath of the strikes has widely circulated on social media. Much of it is very graphic, showing corpses strewn across the ground as huge fires rage all round. In a statement, the US Central Command said the strike was not intended to harm the people of Yemen, who rightly want to throw off the yoke of Houthi subjugation and live peacefully. The United Nations Secretary General said he was gravely concerned about the airstrikes conducted by the United States around the port of Issa, which reportedly resulted in scores of civilian casualties. Observers say assessing the toll of the month-old US airstrike campaign has been difficult because the US military hasn't released information about the attacks, including what was targeted and how many people were killed. The Houthis, meanwhile, strictly control access to attacked areas and don't publish complete information on the strikes, many of which likely have targeted military and security sites. To discuss this topic joins me from Washington Nicholas Brumfield. Mr. Brumfield is a DC-based Middle East politics researcher with a focus on Yemen and maritime security. He holds an MA in Arab Studies from the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies at Georgetown University. Mr. Brumfield, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. If we could begin with this, Mr. Brumfield, how do you assess the US airstrikes on Houthis, okay, after more now than 7 weeks?
So I think it's fair to say that they're definitely much more intense than the airstrikes that we had seen take place under the Biden administration in a very big way. We're talking, over the course of 2023 to early 2025, I believe the estimate is that there were somewhere around 900 strikes under the Biden administration, and just in the past couple weeks, we're looking at over 300, according to some estimates, across dozens of waves of airstrikes. They do not seem to care about civilian casualties in the way that the Biden administration airstrikes did either. And so we have seen much higher civilian casualty ratios. To the extent that they're effective, I think it remains to be seen. We do know that they have successfully targeted Houthi military and security infrastructure, as well as various Houthi leaders. However, we have yet to see any confirmed killings of senior Houthi leaders. Most of the ones that we've seen thus far have been mid or low level.
Okay. Now, if we just now stick to the latest airstrikes on Ras Issa oil port, okay, Nicholas, okay. Now, the US Central Command had quickly confirmed the airstrikes, and they said in their statement that the strike was not intended to harm the people of Yemen, who rightly want to throw off the yoke of Houthi subjugation and live peacefully. The question is, how do you understand this within the context of high death toll casualties reported?
In the sense that they're knowingly targeting vital civilian infrastructure, I just don't consider it terribly true. What the Ras Issa port strike needs to be contextualized in is the ongoing U.S. attempts, both through the foreign terrorist organization designation of the Houthis, but also previously Israeli strikes on Hodeidah port infrastructure in mid to late 2024 that are aiming to target major Houthi financial flows in the form of fuel that they import through Hodeidah and then sell and are able to pocket the money there. This has been a major concern for those following Houthi funding for a very long time, and it is true that this is a major financial flow for them. It also just so happens to be that those oil flows are something that 20 million Yemenis living in northern Yemen rely on. So to the extent that you're able to pull those two things apart, I'm suspect of.
Yeah. Okay. Now, as you have raised it, that the U.S. Main goal is to neutralize what they call Ras Issa as the economic base of the Houthis. Okay, but some local sources in the same time reported that the strike was what we call a double tab, Nicholas. Okay, it was a double tab strike, targeting the same target twice. Okay, and the death toll was so high because the second wave hit after emergency crews first arrived at the scene. Now the question is, if the intention was avoiding civilian casualties, okay, what justified the double tab strike?
To be honest, I don't think anything does. I generally, particularly from the Trump administration, I'm not believing any of their statements about wanting to reduce civilian casualties. If you look at the way that they've conducted their strikes versus how the Biden administration conducted their strikes, it seems very much that they do not care. And according to recent reports, even sort of talking about parameters for engagement across the Middle East by the U.S. military with regards to civilian casualties and other sort of limitations on the kinds of strikes that U.S. forces are allowed to carry out, they've significantly limited the rules of engagement since Trump came into office.
Okay, you've just raised it that the Trump administration, okay, has been particularly what they call observers tight-lipped about civilian casualties, Nicholas, okay, resulting from their operations not only in Ras Issa. Okay, this stance have been called by critics, okay, or they have mocked at it, given top officials sharing what we call highly sensitive plans for attacking Yemen on a signal group chat. So they chat there and they keep tight-lipped when it comes to civilian casualties. What is your reaction to this?
For those who've been following American politics, this is a major breach of the normal way of doing business and the standard operating protocols for how the U.S. government is supposed to be sharing information, even within itself. So if you look at the U.S. side of things, politically at least, the signal group chat controversy is in many ways much more controversial than even the fact that the U.S. is conducting these airstrikes in Yemen. So it's very big in D.C. And so the complete lack of transparency with regards to the airstrikes is making it much more difficult for researchers like myself to adequately assess what's going on, because all that we have are what the Houthis say, more or less. And so in terms of the number of strikes, in terms of the number of casualties, it makes it much more difficult to get a good picture of what's going on.
Okay. Now, in one of your old articles, Nicholas, okay, back when Israel attacked Hodeidah port for the first time, okay, you suggested that such strikes could embolden the Houthis. My question is, likewise, can the Trump airstrikes do the same?
Oh, absolutely. So the Trump airstrikes are very much seemingly destabilizing the situation on the ground in Yemen, not just on the Houthi side, but also on the side of the Yemeni government. You're seeing multiple reports of, perhaps preparations for a ground offensive in the Hodeidah area, but also, worries that the Houthis would begin to mobilize, in particular if they're cut off from international import flows through Hodeidah, which is a major concern for them. If, for instance, they're not able to import, domestic gas through Hodeidah, Marib's right there, and it's a constant sort of temptation, perhaps, for them of, oh, maybe we should just take Marib. So this is a major concern for those who've been following Yemen for any length of time. Could this incentivize a return to conflict on the ground?
Okay. Now, in terms of the U.S. reputation on the world stage, Nicholas, okay, do you think this Trump campaign, okay, in the context of what we call increasing numbers of civilian casualties being reported, okay, do you think such strikes can create what we call reputational risk for the U.S. on the international stage?
Oh, absolutely. I think in very similar to, sort of the sort of reputational damage the United States has taken over the course of the past 2 years, in particular with regards to its support to Israel and Gaza. Sort of reports of mass casualties in Yemen does really do some reputational damage to the United States. So yeah, no, it's going to hurt the reputation here.
Okay. You just mentioned that the strikes did not only harm Yemeni civilians or only the Houthis, but also the international Yemeni recognized government. Okay, and this brings me to the question. Okay, those strikes. Do you think those strikes would harm also the UN-led process in Yemen?
Oh, absolutely. To the extent that they are going to incentivize various parties to think that they can either, on the Yemeni government side, maybe they can finally get a ground offensive going in Yemen to dislodge the Houthis from Hodeidah, or to the extent that they make the Houthis think, okay, there's no point in engaging in this process with the Yemeni government and the Saudis anymore. We might as well just, go back to fighting. Yeah, it could very much undermine the UN-led process, and UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg has been very vocal about that for the last year or more.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned again the possibility of ground operation, Nicholas. Okay. So, to what extent that option is there with the U.S. Decision makers?
To be honest with you, it's been a bit unclear. While the United States government has been very vociferous in its criticism of the Houthis and saying that they're going after the Houthis and they want to remove them from Yemen. At the same time, they've sent conflicting signals to say that they do not care what's happening on the ground in Yemen. And honestly, given the Trump administration's history of sort of commitments and keeping commitments and that sort of thing, in terms of supporting a long-running sort of extensive operation on the ground in Yemen, that currently seems to be not feasible, but that could possibly be changing as we've seen in recent reports.
Okay, now if we come back to Ras Issa strike, Nicholas, okay, now despite some civilian casualties being reported, not a single statement, okay, was issued by the Trump administration, even expressing sorrow about what happened. We did not see anything of that. How do you interpret this?
I think this represents or sort of demonstrates the profound shift, perhaps, that we're seeing in U.S. foreign policy and in U.S. use of military force. We saw it kind of under the first Trump administration, and then sort of the Biden administration at least sort of went back to sort of pretending to care about civilian casualties. But what we're seeing with Trump too is they're not even pretending to care in terms of issuing statements saying that they're concerned. It really does seem to be gloves are off. And this is reflected both domestically in the United States, but also in its foreign policy.
Okay. So a final point, if you may, Nicholas. Okay. Now, where do you see this U.S. campaign, okay, heading to in Yemen?
Honestly, I don't think the Trump administration really knows what direction it's going to. We've seen reports, perhaps, that they're going to try to wind down the air campaign. They've used a lot of ordnance against the Houthis without much evidence that it's done all that much. So we may see a continuation, maybe a drawdown, perhaps. Probably what we're going to see is some continuation of U.S. airstrikes in Yemen for the foreseeable future. Maybe not as heavy as what we've seen over the course of the last month. And yeah, just a kind of volatile, unstable status quo. At least until the next thing happens with regards to either a ground offensive or a breakthrough in the peace process, or something going on in Gaza that can potentially end the conflict.
Okay. With this, we come to the end of this interview, Nicholas. Thank you so much for your time and insights, and thank you for talking to Yemen Today TV.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. That's all for this time. See you next week with a new edition of The Third Dimension.